Okay, so I guess we are on. Right. So good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, January 16th, 2020. The time is 11 a.m. This is a special meeting to discuss new building planning. Attending are Commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Fillios. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move forward. And let me just make a comment. We indicated here that we have a potential action item. I don't think we're going to be making any decisions today. What I wanted to do was come to some consensus, at least in terms of the amount of money that is potentially flowing back to us from the URD closures, as well as setting up a process where at least Pat and Shawn, who is representing us on the BOCC, can get together on the logistics of the building, because we really can't take a vote, we can't proceed with an actual action item until we know not just the rough estimate of the price, but who's going where, and we just need greater detail. So you guys are gonna have to communicate, but let's start with the funding. Dena, you had sent, I believe, an email with John's latest numbers. And I've got a copy of that. It's titled Kootenai County Courthouse 2020 25-year amortization. Okay, John, go
Does
ahead.
everybody have a copy of that?
If not, I've got extra copies here. Go
I've
ahead.
got just the front page, which
And-
is most of it.
Okay. I've got some extra copies if people need, or we can run some more. I've got a couple more here. Okay, go ahead, John.
Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. As we've looked at the numbers and, I've verified them, I talked with Treasurer Steve Matheson. I haven't talked with Dena directly, but I think she was gonna check a couple of those other ones that expire like in 2020 and so forth. And I got these numbers from Diane, and I checked again with her last week, and she thought they were correct. They're based on the 2006 base year. So all things being equal, we think that the numbers are correct. And so in that instance, it will allow you around $2 million, $2 million and some change, starting in fiscal year 22.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay.
And so if you look at the left-hand column, it kind of shows you what we could fund, what we believe we could fund for that, and then a cash requirement from the county in the meantime before your increment starts to come in. And so that's, you see the building in there at 24 million. Of course, all these numbers will depend on what the actual bids come back and how much
Right.
how much cash the county wishes to put in against those bonds, for example. And then it also allows $8 million in the remodel. So, and that's something that can be delayed. And when I talked to Steve Matheson about that, he thought that, it's gonna be a couple of years before we'll see the exact increment to know what that is. So maybe we just go out and build the building now for the 24 million and save the 8 million for 2 years from now when they're ready to remodel. Or we could issue it now and invest the proceeds someplace until you need them. Maybe you'd like to start your remodel now with some of those funds. So there's some options with that. So at 32 million, we're able, over 25 years, to cover the debt service requirement, which is 2,014,000. So we're able to cover that with a 15% factor, which each year half of that gets returned to the PAC and half to the county. So the bottom line is the county's cost is at the very bottom line. That's 600,000. Assuming that's what you wanted to put in the first year, I think you've appropriated some more funds beyond the 600,000.
Yeah, what did we appropriate? 4 or 5 million?
4.5 million is the last number that I heard.
Okay.
Is that correcting?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's additional cash that could be put towards the bonds as well. That's the appropriation you care to keep. Or if you'd like to use that money for some other purpose, there's some flexibility in the numbers to do that.
Okay.
And so then in 8 years from now, that's when the river district funding comes in, and that's going to be another million or so a year, just in today's dollars, that'll be available to the board. Hopefully you'll all still be here and can make that appropriation. So this gets us the foundation, we believe, to move forward now with the cash you have appropriated, get the design done, and to proceed. PAC's willing to help out, I think, in any way. Wally will admit that we need to make that happen. And one thing we've talked about is who's the lead on this?
Yeah, there are a lot of things, yeah, go ahead.
And the experience I have, as I've mentioned before, is some years ago when I was at the city and somebody else was at PAC, and Jim Devenbach. PAC just left it to the city to do all of the bids, to go out for bids and everything on that. So get the design work done, get the bids, and then come back and tell us how much they needed us to put towards the 20-year lease on the police station. And so that's the way that worked. And then we also had a call feature in there so that when the city passed a justice bond, which they did a few years ago, they paid off that lease and acquired the building at that point. So using that model, if you care to do that, the county would take the lead on the design for go out for bid for the architect, get the design work done, do all of those things, put as much cash as you want towards the project, and then come back to us and tell us how much you'd like us to finance on the balance. Because that will then dictate the amount of debt service that you'd have to cover through the lease. At the very top, you'll see that the price per square foot on 100,000 is $1.70. And that includes the $8 million on the remodel. So that number would be much lower if we didn't fund the $8 million.
The 8 million, okay.
It's gonna be about $1.40 or something.
Question, John, where do you show the increments as they come in or come back to the county?
If you look at under the big thing that says revenue, a third of the way down,
Yes,
you'll see tax increment with a 1 by it. So that's the amount that we expect you'll get in 2022.
okay,
That's $2,061,000.
okay,
We've escalated that by 3%, assuming that that's what the budgets do over that period for those properties. And then there's a cash equivalent because it doesn't quite cover the debt service that's required on those years with the 15% factor. And again, the 15% factor allows us to get the interest rate at that lower level. It gives some security to the investor that you've got enough lease money coming back to PAC to pay the lease.
okay.
And so it's an awful lot of numbers for you to look at, and I can appreciate that it's a lot.
So what's outflowing from us? Okay, I can see 2020, 600,000, that's, let's say, the initial,
Yes,
okay. And then in 2021, 1.4?
1.312. So if you look at the second line from the bottom.
Right here, okay. Oh, total cost of the
Total
county,
cost
I'm
of the
sorry,
county
okay,
with
yeah.
4 after it. Because part of that 15% gets rebated back to the county. So in other words, we don't have to keep the 15% on the books after you've made the lease payment.
Okay,
And next year, when you appropriate the next lease, it'll include the 15%. When you make the lease payment, half of that gets returned to you and half to PAC. And so that's why it's 1.3 million. The next year, 2.1, stays pretty constant the years after that at 2.16 something. And so it's only in the first few years until the increment catches up, or until we know the exact figure, that you'd have to infuse some cash in order
Okay.
to cover that.
so if I go along the revenue line,
Mm-hmm.
where it says total revenue up at top,
Yes.
so let's say hypothetically I choose year 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, yeah, year 3 or 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm showing you're showing total revenue of just over 2.3 million?
Yes.
And the total cost to the county for that year is 2.165?
Correct.
Okay,
And that's because 151,000 would be rebated back to you of that 15% factor.
okay.
That's the line, just 4 lines above.
Precisely, what is the 15% factor? What is that?
Investors, when they loan the money to PAC, want to know that there's at least a 15% factor. Your lease amount that you're appropriating in that fiscal year is 15% higher than the actual payment required to the investor. It gives them some security.
Some sort of a cushion.
Correct. And that security then allows us to get the interest rate lower, down to
Okay.
3.8. And then at the end of the lease, they no longer need that security because that year is over. So we refund that
Okay.
equally between you and PAC. It
Okay.
becomes PAC's, basically PAC's admin fee, if you will.
And that's annually at the end of each year?
Yes.
Okay.
Then the next year when you appropriate, same thing would happen in the next year.
Okay.
Because there's still a risk factor, folks, as you can imagine, because at some point another board of commissioners could say, you know, we think we will go out to the fairgrounds after all. PAC, you can have a building downtown. Well, what do we do with a building that's been specifically designed for your purpose?
Okay.
And so, yeah, sure, we end up with a building on your land, but it would be somewhat difficult at that point, fill it up at $1.70 or whatever the price per square foot is, with those specific design in mind. So
Mhm.
that risk factor is in this also.
Built in.
Yeah, typically it's a year-to-year lease, so, you know, we're exposed for whatever issue might happen.
Right. Dena, do you have any questions?
I'm just wondering if that 15%, is that pretty standard across the board for this kind of a transaction?
That's what our investment banker told us would be a factor we would need at minimum. Obviously, the higher the factor, a little bit lower the interest rate.
Okay.
So we're basically buying the rate down, is what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Buying points, yeah.
Buying, exactly.
Yeah, 5
Yeah.
points, that's a good
Exactly.
analogy.
Right, so if new growth goes away, that's my big concern. And I'm sure Rich probably shares that concern, is like, this is all based that we're gonna be able to keep new growth. Because if we put all of our eggs into the basket with new growth for this to pay for the building, and suddenly we have a choice between new growth or 3%, and one of them goes away, we're gonna be in a real pickle.
And that's a
to
very
fund our
good, and that's a
budget.
very good point, and a good reason not to make any decisions now, because the legislature's in, what is it, 3 months? To the
Yeah,
end of March or
April.
April?
Yeah, I would say the first week of April, we'll have a solid idea on what has happened.
Right,
So,
right.
Yeah.
And that's a key point, thank you for that.
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
This is a really good spreadsheet. Explains a lot. Is there any way members of the public can get a copy of this if they want it?
Absolutely, I think you'd
Public
like to
record.
post it on your site.
Okay.
We can put it on PAC's.
Yeah,
Because I'm just saying, this is good information for people.
I would just also say, you know, it's preliminary.
Yes,
Right,
good point.
right, that's okay.
Some
Let them see
estimates,
preliminary.
you
It
don't
says
wanna
that.
see it hang
Once
their
it
hat
gets
on
out,
or-
then it's like in stone,
Yeah.
and that's.
Right,
Well, I have a problem with us looking at these things and making decisions and this not being available to the public. There are
Well, we
problems
can
with that.
post it.
Yeah.
It's a real good point.
Yeah, and I think the point has to be made that it's preliminary. It says it right there.
Oh, I know, but people miss that.
And
I
we
know.
can actually do that.
We
For
can-
discussion
Yeah.
purposes, preliminary.
We can put it across here in a watermark, okay?
yeah.
Yeah, and that's just a point I make.
Yeah.
Sure.
Actually, it's a really good point.
Yeah.
And that's always an issue when you work with governments is, and I've been with them for 33 years now, how do you get the word out to the decision makers? You know, is it ahead of the public? Typically, you want it to be, because you don't want to get expectations built, for example, that there's gonna be a new police station or a new courthouse. And so I think you've done well to hold these meetings in a public setting, advertised obviously as you do. So now I think would be an excellent time for the public to get more information about it
Absolutely.
in their hands.
So earlier, John, you alluded to who takes the lead on this, whether it be PAC or the county. Can we discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, I think Wally and I talked about that, and again, the only model I have that's this size is the city's model on the police station. And the city wanted to design that, they wanted to make sure it was exactly the way the police department wanted it. And it was a very specific building with, well, you can imagine what
Yeah,
What it
I've been
has.
in there.
Yeah.
I know what that is.
And so the police department took the whole thing by design. They got a committee of officers and they designed it. And then they went out to the bids and they got the quotes. And then they invested some cash like you are, so that there was less risk for PAC in case they walked away from that very specialized building. Would have been difficult for PAC to release it to somebody. So, and I think they had like 20% into it by the time it was all done, and we financed the 80%. PAC did. I was on the PAC board at the time as the treasurer, so I was kind of wearing two hats. But I tried to get the best deal I could for the city, obviously. But it worked out well for both parties, I think, because they had entertained the idea for a long time of going to the people with a vote to try to get a new police station. And we know how that's typically received. And you have to get 2/3 approval. We just saw in Shoshone County, their jail got shut down with 48%. So they're in a real pickle because they don't have any urban renewal money coming to them in the next year or two. They have no urban renewal districts in Shoshone County.
And their jail is very old.
Yeah, it's
What was the cost, John, do you know?
32 million?
Before my time, John.
Big facility.
And they were gonna bond for it?
The
Oh, Shoshone, I thought you were talking about the.
And they were gonna bond for it?
Right,
Okay.
we helped them with the language for the ballot and got some bond counsel involved and so forth, but, they pretty much ran it up the flagpole. I was actually surprised that 48% of people would agree to a new jail, because it was a huge increase in their taxes. As you can imagine, much smaller tax base than you have here, maybe 1/10 what we have here, and yet a $30 million building, so it was a humongous increase.
Well, a lot of people are getting tired, we all are, of tax and tax and tax, and these bond issues, and then you have our URDs, and people don't like them because they don't feel like they have a direct hand in them. And that's why no matter what we do, it needs to be out front, and if we do this, that's great. If we do a bond, it becomes incumbent upon the commissioners and everybody else in the county to undertake a real honest educational effort, instead of sitting back there and saying, this won't pass, this won't pass. Well, if you have that attitude, I can guarantee you, this will not pass.
And what's nice about this, Commissioner, is because of the lease arrangement, you don't have to go to the voters.
Yeah, it's not a bond.
Because you're not asking them for more money. This is money that's already being paid by taxpayers throughout the urban renewal district, from here all the way up to Winco, basically.
And what would happen if they did bond for it and did approve it? What would happen to that money?
Yeah, you could use this money to pay the bond. You could do that.
What else could happen with it?
It would be obligated for just that purpose.
Out of the URD?
Yeah, in
You
other
couldn't
words,
do anything else with it?
yeah, if you passed a bond
Yeah.
for this building, it could only be used for that purpose.
Okay.
The way this is set up is you can use that money for any purpose, including paying a lease back. So it gives you some flexibility on the money that you wouldn't otherwise have with a bond.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
Well, I just have two questions. One is probably kind of silly or ignorant, but on the revenue line, it remains the same for the whole 25 years. So if levy rates continue to go down, does that affect that? I mean, how does that number remain the same?
It's coming from taxpayers that are currently in your district. It doesn't include any new growth. It does include, for the first couple of years, a 3% increase. But then by year 5, it stays flat the rest of the way. And so, if you remember, the only thing that pushes levy rates down is when market values go up.
Right.
And so we're keeping a constant market value and a constant levy. So
Gotcha.
as long as you continue to budget what you do and not
Right.
decrease your budget, the impact won't be felt.
Okay. So that's what it was, it's just a constant valuation, not a growth situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you have a question, Dena?
I'm just thinking in my mind, when we do a big project, we usually have to have 3 bids. So given the PAC has done all this work.
That was my second
Do
question.
we need to go out and have some other folks do
Very,
this
very,
kind of
very,
work?
very good
Yeah.
point. Okay,
So
go
it
right
sounds
ahead.
to me like, correct me if I'm wrong, John, that you're just the financing option. The selection of the architect, the selection of the contract, all that stuff would be the county's responsibility. Okay, so then, we're gonna have to RFQ for the architect.
Right, but we had to go out for police cars.
Yeah, for
So
the
I,
lease,
for the financing for
cars.
the police cars.
Correct.
So I'm assuming there's nothing different for
Yeah,
this.
kind
We're
of.
gonna
What's
have to
different
go
is
out.
that, you own the police cars, and you won't own this building.
No,
No,
leasing.
we own the police
don't own
cars
the police
after the
cars.
3-year lease period.
It's.
Mhm.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
we're leasing them this year, I'm
We
sorry.
had to
You
go
brought
out
me
for
to-
bid
Oh,
for
on the lease.
financing.
For the
Yes.
financing,
On a
right,
3-year
right.
lease,
Sure.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking if this is similar, we probably should keep that in mind.
Right, the
Yeah.
thing that may be different here is if, and this comes back to the working arrangement, if PAC front ends this, so they're selecting the architect, they're not subject necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong here, to the same rules and regulations that we are. So for example, we may have to go out formally for an RFP, RFQ, whatever, but if PAC does it, they can go ahead and make the selection. Now, realistically, would we want that to happen? I'm sure we'd want to say in that, I'm sure Shawn would
Yeah.
want to be, but go ahead, anybody want to
Well,
comment on
I
that?
think that for $30 million, the
You
architect
probably want to go out.
is the key. They can either make or break the project.
Sure.
We would want to go out and put an RFQ and put together a selection committee. And if they're not gonna do that, then all of those statutes that we operated under for the jail expansion, for
Right.
instance, or, anything else, would apply. I don't know about financing and having to go out to bid for that, I only know
Yeah,
it
put that aside for a
from the
moment.
construction side of it.
Okay,
So, then once we did get our architect, then we would start initial planning, but we're also going to have to do the CMGC process, construction manager, general contractor.
Yes.
That we want that, so,
which is what Sletton did for the jail.
right, so let's just say that once the architect has an estimated cost of which we have prepared what we want and gave it to them, then we go out and we try to select the best CMGC we can find. And then we tell them, okay, here's our architect, and here's our $24 million that's coming from these guys. You need to make this happen, just like we did with the jail. We said,
Okay.
we have 11, and they made it happen for 10. So that way, we have, the county has the say in who's building it, who's designing it, who's doing everything in it. But before you, just my thought, before
Go
you
ahead.
get too far down the commitment road,
Hmm?
we need to know what you want before I
Precisely.
can do the RFQ. And that's what I was talking to you the other day, Chris. That's when the board first thing has to sit down and say, okay, we agree we want a building. We don't have any choice here. Okay, who's going to the building? Who's going?
Which groups?
Yeah, who's going? Is it gonna be all court? Is it gonna be an admin building? Is it gonna be 50-50? We know we want the PD someplace because we get $11,000 a month back on that. Once you can determine who that is that's actually gonna go, then you're probably gonna have to put your feet in the hard sand because somebody's gonna get offended that they don't get to go to the new building. So that will come next. Then we can sit down with those people that are going to the new building, bring the space study back in, and now we can start to dial it down as to what exactly it is that you, being the commissioners, want in that building and how you want it done. While that process, at that particular point, while that process is going on, that's when we should send the RFQ out for the architect. So it's about a 2-month process from the time I start to write it up, then legal has to look at it, then it goes out, then it comes back to the business meeting, then there's a
You
selection
mean
committee.
the architectural?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
then we have a selection committee to score them to pick the right one. Usually that's the commissioners and, me and maybe, Dave Callahan or somebody.
And
like
again,
that.
what you did with the jail expansion.
Right, we just follow it right down the line, and that's what we did with the jail. We knew, we had multiple meetings downstairs, and we knew, okay, this is gonna be all hard sells. Yes, that's what we want. Okay, we want an inmate, female inmate worker dorm, because we have to have it. We want a new laundry facility, and we just kind of boxed it all in there, and then, once you have that, boom. Because the architect is just gonna sit there and spin his wheels if you don't have a really good idea of the starting point. So if we're going to be doing it, which it sounds like we are, that's the process. And it's gonna be, I just was making some notes, you know, probably 8 months of design, 8 to 12 months in design, depending on, and that, again, the less time in design comes as a result of you putting in the time to figure out who's going where, and exactly what you want.
Right.
But probably 8 to 12 months of design, 2 to 4 months of selection process for the CMGC and the
How many? Did you
architect.
say 2?
Huh?
It's 2 months?
Yeah, 2 to 4, depending on if you wanna launch them both. You're gonna launch them at separate times, because you have to have your architect first. So, and then, probably at least 1.5 years to 2 years
To build?
to build. And you're gonna have to think about, in that remodel phase of it, at least if nothing else, we'll have to take a look at the current mechanical systems.
Yeah.
They were put in
All
1997.
need to
You mean
be
here?
done.
Yes, here, so, you know, you may not, and the best time to do that is when you're doing the new building, because
Yeah.
you're gonna get
Everybody's
the
here.
best
Yes.
mechanical engineer.
Yeah, we're
that
just
you
waiting
can
for the
find.
boiler
Yeah.
here to blow
And
up.
he's, yeah. And so,
It's comforting.
I don't know that you need to make decisions about, you know, doing a full-blown remodel, but you do need to look at your mechanical systems. They've been here since 1997. And that's one of those investments that you can make that will actually pay for itself because of how energy efficient things are now versus, you know,
20 years ago.
1997. And maybe you won't walk in and it's 61 degrees on Monday
Yeah.
morning.
So it
So-
seems to me that if Leslie and Bill agree that you probably need to start, I don't know, help me out here, start working perhaps with PAC, with Wally, in terms of some of the legit, we're not gonna make any decisions here, and I think that's what we said early on, because we need to wait to see what happens, if anything, with the new growth.
What I heard was, yeah, so to me, it's 2 separate issues.
Go ahead.
To me, we start with who do we want in the new building?
There you go.
And then that's the building part of it. The finance part, I don't think we could or should do anything until the first week of April. And
Fair
we may
enough.
know before then, because if some law passes, we may have to say, oh, stop all building stuff. It's not gonna happen.
Right.
So that's kind of where I'm at. I want to go through and say, okay, these are top priorities for the new building. Maybe even talk about a shell, you know, one floor being a shell or whatever. I would like to see that building shrink a little bit, come down in price, and be just a little bit more manageable.
Okay.
This seems super, wow, really expensive. And, you know, I've said it before, we don't know what technology is gonna bring. We don't know if we're gonna have desk sharing. We don't know people working from home. We just don't know what's coming forth. You know, if the state decided to take DMV and driver's license away from us, I mean, that's never gonna happen. But if it did, that's a whole bunch of space that just opened up for us. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at things. So I think going forward with just saying, okay, here's our top priorities for the building. We just have to not even, just keep an eye out for financing issues until April, until we know that they're not gonna slam something in, you know, the last week of March and.
Okay, so then in the immediate, back to your suggestion, is sitting down and deciding who's
Yep.
gonna occupy.
That,
Yep.
who's gonna occupy
Okay.
it, and what do you want to glean from the space study? Once you determine who's gonna go in there, now we can start drilling down to, for instance, I'm not picking on anybody, but for instance, the judge's chambers don't need to be this big,
Right.
okay? And the auditor's office is gonna have to share a break room. They don't need their own, you know, once you know who's going, you can start to dial down, you know?
Just using an example.
You're right.
Yes. And so and that thing really is a 2 or 3 month process
So-
in
so
my
we-
vision. It's
so we-
gonna take a while to do this. It's gonna get you to April.
Oh, no, that makes
just to
perfect
get this
sense.
done. Yeah.
Okay, so, but in the meantime, any role here, I mean, we know John's role here because it's strictly the financing, but is there any role in this period for PAC?
No.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay, I
don't-
just wanted to
I
establish
don't
that.
think so, because we have to decide,
Sure.
they have to decide internally how they want to go. There's no
Right,
direction yet of who's gonna go where,
right.
so there's really nothing for.
I'm sorry, Rich, did you want to say something?
Well, I just think that you have an idea here from PAC as far as financing, but I know that in the past for other structures, I believe when we built the Post Falls facility,
Uh-huh.
IAC was involved in it, in the financing of it, so there are other alternatives, and I'm not, I think I think PAC would be, is a good is a good alternative, but I think we really need to, and this could be something that we can look at, is to see, is there other entities? I don't know if ICREMP does financing, but if IAC still does financing, and this is a big project, so I don't know if they can even do it. But just keep that in mind, and that's something that we can explore now as we wait,
Sure.
right?
Well-
Absolutely right, and I'm glad you brought that up, Rich, because obviously it was our idea. I brought it to Wally's brought it here.
Right,
okay?
right.
Because all they did was look ahead, see, in a couple of years, you've got a revenue stream
Right.
to pay for your building. The reason I like PAC involved instead of like a Parkwood Properties or somebody that does all of Kootenai Health's buildings on a lease that they'll never own, is this is, obviously you're gonna own it within 20 years. Plus PAC is a nonprofit that you're a member of, you're a member.
You're on the board, yes.
Yes, and Leslie attends on that behalf, so, it's a local, the dollars stay local on the admin fee, if you will, which helps PAC's mission
Well,
throughout North Idaho.
for me legally, it has to be opened up. I mean, and you guys might be the winner, and that's great, you know, but legally, I feel it absolutely has to be opened up. And just, you know, kind of, well, we tried that already. Didn't work well, and so we went out for bid, and that worked great. And actually, the people who we were looking at the hardest won the bid.
Is
And
it the lowest
actually-
bidder on that, or is it?
It was responsive. The
Most
other two were not
responsive.
responsive.
Yeah, it was the only responsive bid that
Yep.
had all the
Right.
criteria.
Yeah, so they weren't even the lowest. They were the responsive bid, though.
And there's actually even that, this third factor is, who owns a building is relevant only as far as if it's a nonprofit, then there's no property tax cost factored in. If Park would put together a proposal, for example, they would, of course, ICREMP or any of those would also be exempt. So, I think that the key is, who do you want? Is it a local nonprofit that runs this, that keeps the costs down? And then the financing is kind of a separate thing. We can certainly bid that out. We can go to Piper Jaffray, we can go to Northwest, we can go to all the different people that are bidding all around the state to
There you
get,
go, right there.
which is, I've already done, but we can do that again. I mean, this is the lowest I've been able to find. And I'm financing stuff all over the place.
Who was this, by the way?
This is,
Municipal financing on Boise,
Oh,
Jim worked with Jim Wrigley.
okay.
he's been around for 100 years, like me, and so, and the best thing about going to the market like that is that they can, as we've talked about, they can structure the bonds. So they can put more of it in the back end if you needed to. They can
Oh, I
put it
see
in-
what you,
They
okay.
could start it in year 6 when you know you're gonna have more revenue from the river district, for example, when it expires. So, the financing, I can see where you'd wanna take a 3-bid thing. Whether or not you wanna look at somebody besides PAC to do that, that's,
I would think that as long as,
Go ahead,
I
Shawn.
go out on a limb a little bit, but as long as you have documentation of soliciting those 3, then that might
Satisfied?
suffice.
oh, sure.
Because that's what the statute says, you gotta go get at least 3. Okay, but it doesn't say we have to go get it if
Right.
we're not the ones who are providing the
Right.
financing.
That's a good
So
point.
if you've done them, I would just hang on to that documentation,
So
and we
you're-
could talk to legal and ask
And see if
legal,
that's
Yeah.
gonna work.
you know, it's
So-
uncharted water.
Right. So if I'm understanding this correct, 'cause I like to put things in simple terms, you're the landlord, you have to have your own financing
Right.
in order, and then we're the
Leasing.
Right.
leasing.
And clearly, since you're a member of PAC, we're gonna be looking out for your interests more so than anybody else. Because the lower interest rate we get, the lower your lease rate is, and the less dollars you have to dedicate to that.
Sure.
So, that's why I brought it back, and, you know, I think it helps to keep the number, not that ICRIP maybe couldn't use some of the management fee money, and, ICRIP financed this, I believe.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was IAC or ICAP.
I'm sure it was
I think it was
ICRIP.
Yeah.
Probably not.
So,
around
you know,
that time,
whatever
so.
admin fee they had, you
Yeah.
know, went to ICRIP and stayed in Boise, basically, so.
Chris, I need to leave for
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
another
Okay.
meeting,
Okay,
if I can be excused.
yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, but I think this is great, great stuff. And I think with the proviso that it's a preliminary pro forma, maybe that's redundant, but
It helps.
that people understand that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, so then in the immediate, it's really you and us, Shawn, and anybody else that we might need to recruit along the way to decide who moves, who goes where, based on the study that Scott Fisher of Architects West did. Make sense?
Yep. Yep.
Other than that, yes, sir.
Chris, one more thing just to bring up is maybe just consider it, put our collective heads together to see if there's any other mechanism to fund this besides increment reimbursement, new development, right? Because that, right now, when you get new development and the new development role, those funds are typically used within the budget, right? So
Oh, I
this
see
would
what-
be, this, where, you know, in the closing of these urban renewal districts, which we've already been through a couple of those, we've used those funds.
Yep.
Right? So this would be funding that you'd be taking away from the general budget
Operations. Yep.
Yeah, for a long time.
for a
Yes.
long time. And
25 years.
I was at a public policy meeting the other day, and there was an item that was brought up that I don't have knowledge of where this is at in statute, but they said there is a user, hold on,
Admin fee.
yeah, a local option user admin fee that can be added to registrations. And if that's the case, I can't find it in code. I've been looking, I'm trying to find it.
I did find something, I actually sent it to you.
Yeah, and that was on highway districts.
Oh,
And the
okay.
money can only be used for
Highway districts, and that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So,
So, and if that's the case, if there is the possibility
Yeah,
of
another
tacking an admin fee onto registrations, just to give you an idea, we processed over 300,000 registrations last year. So it wouldn't be much of an admin fee to add like $5 a registration.
Almost 2 cars for every citizen in Kootenai
Yes,
County.
yes.
Oh my gosh.
And all registrations would be, you know, campers, cars, motorcycles,
yeah,
all that.
everything.
So if you just add $5, you can cover this
Cover
pretty
your debt
easy.
service.
So I have heard that KMPO is also looking at, I think it's the exact same thing for roads right now.
Yeah.
So,
There is a statute for that, for roads,
okay,
exactly.
so, but it's also on the registration fee. So now my
Yes.
registration fee was $35 and now it's $85.
Well, that would be moving it up $50 a pop.
Right, but that's what KMPO's looking at.
Oh, that.
Yes.
That's pretty
That's-
draconian.
That's dramatic.
Yes, very, very dramatic.
That would fund everything that they wanna do.
It would, that's
Plus.
exactly right. So,
We need
I
one of
just
those.
want to,
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea, Rich, I really do. And they're gonna send theirs out to a public vote. So if that's voted down, that might be a real option for us to do, because nobody's even gonna remember $5, you know, or whatever we
Exactly.
ended up
Exactly.
doing, so,
And it's fee-based, it's not a tax.
Right.
Correct.
So are you saying that we need to research to see if in fact we can do this?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
brought up that there was this possibility. I just haven't been able to find it in statute, and I wasn't aware of it. I do know right now that the board has to pass our admin fee, right? Because we have to have,
Okay, so we need legal to look
what
into
is the exact cost of doing business? And we can add that on as an admin fee, in which we brought to you, earlier, or late last year, we brought to you, our mailing fee went up.
yep.
So we brought that forward. and that's part of our admin. So the board has that authority to do that, but I don't, they said local option user fee. I just can't find that in statute.
So we'll have legal check into it.
Yeah,
We can do that.
If you wanna stop by my office when we're done, I may actually have it, a copy of that, so
Okay.
I'll look at that.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay, that would be interesting, okay. All right,
That's still
So-
an increase, it's still an increase to your ratepayers, to your taxpayers.
Yes.
Yeah.
This option does not.
Stuff in the budget.
yeah, because you're dealing with a rebate. Right, I understand. So if I don't know if anybody can answer the question, but for the $5 increase, is that something we can do as a board? You're saying we don't necessarily have to go out for a public vote?
We have to find out.
Oh, we have to find out, we
Yeah.
still
We
don't
have
know,
to find
okay.
out, but like when we started up the collection arm in district court,
Yes,
you guys approved a
We
resolution
approved
for
that one, that's
$12.50
correct.
one-time fee to help pay for the cost of
Right,
the
right.
program, so that's kind of in those same lines, so if it works the same way, yes, the board could approve this administrative.
You know, it's interesting, if the state took a more liberal approach in terms of local option revenue sources, like I think Nancy, you brought up the other day, and Bob Bingham had brought this up to the IAC, a local option resort tax. And he used some great examples when he said, for example, if you're booking, an excursion to Las Vegas, who doesn't go there because of the tax? And their tax is quite hefty. Ours is quite low. So if that were increased, it would hardly be noticed by anybody and should have virtually no impact.
Idaho does have a resort tax, but you have to be considered a resort town and you have to be 10,000 population or less.
So it's a
less.
legislative.
Yeah, there you go, that's
Statutorily,
correct.
if the statute could be changed to raise the population, then it would be an available revenue source.
And
We
he
could
actually
have a
brought that forward at
resort tax.
IAC a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, but I don't think it passed.
We rely heavily on
Precisely,
tourism,
amen.
so it might be a good thing to take
Right.
up. And then the other thing, just way out there, I'm not a fan of them, but we could do our own URD.
You can. That's true.
That's interesting.
That's another, I mean, it's completely out of the box, and I'm not a fan of URDs, but we could do one.
The commissioners looked at that a few years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Pat consulted with them, to build a entertainment facility at the fairgrounds.
Okay,
It was gonna be a large venue.
Okay.
Several thousand seats.
safe trip.
So, yeah, it didn't fly very far.
I didn't know.
They got the fair board, and surprisingly, it didn't go very far.
Anyway,
We
okay,
have an option.
are we done? I think we know what we need to do,
Yep.
okay? Public comment? Dave?
It's kind of in the form of a question though. So, I understand that the building would be built on county property.
Hmm?
So I have three questions actually. So would the county retain ownership of the property? Or would the county lease the land to PAC? Or would the county quit claim the land to PAC initially?
It would be at least.
So the county would own the property, lease the land to PAC?
Correct.
Right.
That's how we've done it in the past, lease back.
How's that?
That's it?
That's it?
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone else? 11:44, meeting adjourned, thank you.